forum is being live streamed via News 9 and will also be recorded and uploaded for online viewing following the end of the event. This recording will be available on our Facebook group and our website, and it will also be available on News 9 platforms. So, let's get started with some introductions. First, we have our candidates. We've got Dr. April Grace. She is the Superintendent of Schools for Shawnee, and she lives in Norman. We are also happy to have Dr. John Cox with us. He is Superintendent of Schools from Peggs, Oklahoma. Next, we have Mr. William Crozier from Union City. And then we also have Secretary of Education Ryan Walters, a former teacher and parent from Deer Creek. Of note, Gina Nelson is Oklahoma's Teacher of the Year for 2020. She will be on the fall ballot as a Democrat. So since this is a Republican primary forum, we really just wanted to cut down on voter confusion. So she is not here today, but she will be. We will host another forum in the fall where the winner of these people up here will have them in that fall forum with Ms. Nelson. So at this time, I would also like to recognize and thank the Superintendent of Sulphur Public Schools, Mr. Matt Holder. I don't know where he is, probably in the back. Yep. For allowing us to use your facilities here in Sulphur and working with us to bring you guys this important event. And so now I'm going to introduce our moderator for the day, News 9 education reporter Augusta McDonald. Augusta joined News 9 in April of 2021. She's a Montana native, and she graduated from the University of Montana in Missoula with a degree in journalism. She also studied Middle Eastern civilizations, theology, and politics for 2 years in California. She's worked in Israel and Syria, blogging for the Jerusalem Post in 2015, where she examined rural economies and local religious dynamics of people living in high conflict zones. She's received multiple journalism awards for her work covering methamphetamine use, foster care, and natural disasters, and she's done an outstanding job since she's been in Oklahoma covering education at the Capitol for News 9. So we are thrilled to have her as our moderator today, and we also want to say thank you to our friends at News 9 for sharing her with us and also for providing all the production support to make the broadcast possible. We suspect that there's going to be thousands of people watching this, and we couldn't be able to do this without their help. So thank you, Augusta and News 9, and I'm going to hand the mic over to her.
Thank you, Erica, and thank you to the Rural Schools Coalition for including me in this forum. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you all for being here. So let's get started. Good afternoon. Before we begin, I would like to remind the audience members and candidates to please silence your cell phones. We have a lot of information to get through during our allotted time today, and in order to stay on task, we ask that all audience members and candidates adhere to the following rules. Audience, please be respectful of the candidates and the rest of the audience here today and those watching online. We don't anticipate disruptions from anyone in the audience today. However, in the event that internal disruption to the flow of the event occurs, you will be asked to leave the venue. We are here to gather information as observers. This is not a political rally. Candidates, the forum protocol is as follows. I will pose the question, call on a specific candidate to answer first. Each candidate will then have 2 minutes to answer the question, with an additional minute at the end for the first respondee to provide any follow-up comments. As the first person to answer, they're not afforded tailoring their answers based off what was said before them, so this gives them the opportunity to include an additional response if needed. The order will be rotated evenly to allow all candidates the opportunity for the first and last response slot multiple times. You will receive a 10-second warning to let you know to wrap things up. This will come via the yellow placard in the front row. Once you have reached the 2-minute limit, a buzzer will sound. We ask that all of you, that's the bell, we ask that all of you be mindful of staying on this tight time restriction so that we can allot time for as many questions as possible. This forum will not be held in a true debate form. Unless candidates hold the first and last slot, rebuttals will not be allowed unless called on by the moderator to do so. As moderator, I reserve the right to suspend normal protocol if I feel it's warranted. Be prepared that I may ask some follow-up questions in an effort to dig further into an issue when the need arises. You all have notepads and pens in front of you as well. You are allowed to take notes during the event. and we will take a short bathroom break in the middle of the event. Questions were submitted by voters from around the state during a month-long public submission window. After careful consideration, we had to edit the question list down due to time constraints. Because of this, there are several valid and pressing questions we will not get to in this forum. We would like to give you the opportunity to answer these in written form in the week following the event to be published in tandem with the online recording that will be released. Candidates, is that something you can commit to responding to some written questions this week, yes or no?
Yes.
Awesome, thank you. All right. And turning now to our questions. We're gonna get started with a question on tax credits and school vouchers. And also, because this is streaming, if everybody could lean up a little bit to their mics when you're talking, we'll be sure to catch your audio. All right. This question about tax credits and school vouchers was submitted by Jennifer, a parent and educator from Claremore. Some in the Oklahoma legislature pushed for more funding for private school tuition this year. Senate Bill 1647 was a hot-button bill designed to use public tax dollars to fund private school tuitions with limited oversight. Some estimates suggest the measure would have moved hundreds of millions of dollars out of the state funding formula for public schools. This bill failed to pass the legislature, but proponents of the measure say it will return in 2023. What is your position on using public dollars to fund private school tuition in the form of vouchers, tax credits, or education savings accounts? First for this question, Dr. Grace.
Well, thanks for the question. Part of the issue that I saw with that particular bill was we didn't see enough accountability and transparency on those funds, and I think Oklahoma taxpayers want to see accountability and transparency on the funds. We saw and have seen before how the lack of oversight, then we can end up with fraudulent purchases or things that don't qualify, and so I think it's really important to keep those things in mind. I don't support anything that pulls money away from our public schools, and so anything that would do that, I think we already have a lot of choice options in Oklahoma by both policy and funding. We have opportunity scholarships, Lindsay Nicole Henry scholarships. Those are all available to private school students already, and I think those are great choice options at the time. And so we have public school charters, traditional public schools, virtual online, then we have homeschooling and private school options in our state. So Oklahoma does a good job with choice options. And so for me, anything that would pull funds and lower the amount of funds already with our public schools, I would not be in support of.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Grace. Dr. Cox.
Yes, and first of all, thank you so much for being here today and being out there watching this video. This is such an important time for State Superintendent, and it's going to make an impact on what we do. And this question is really a question that you can see the differences in your candidates. I am not for vouchers. I've studied vouchers for about 15 years now to see, is there a way that you could be accountable for the money that would be spent on private or homeschool, and there's absolutely no way to do that. And as was said, we could see that through the GEARS money, the governor's GEARS money that was spent on all these different items, these gifts that were given to parents, and really a waste of our taxpayer money. So, and I understand inner cities where they want to pull their kids out of those public schools and give them a chance to be successful. But really this becomes an entitlement program, basically a welfare program for students to go out and be pulled out of school and give them a different opportunity. And 2% of our students basically across the state would capture that. So 700,000 go to our schools, and there's about another 80,000 that are involved in homeschool and private school. And all across the state, they're telling me, we don't want government involved in our school system. In our private school, they don't want them in their homes. And so they're adamant about pushing back against our voucher system and sending them any money. And so it's pretty easy to say that we're not for vouchers, but when you're in Oklahoma City and Tulsa and you see some of those kids that need out of those systems to get a different education, I can understand that. But this position here is strictly for the protection of our public schools. State Superintendent should be trying to protect that money. And so that will be my job, is to protect money and fix our schools instead of giving our money away to other entities.
Thank you, Dr. Cox. Mr. Crozier.
Thank you very much for inviting me today. Appreciate it. I don't think that any of the rural schools should be held for the vouchers. We have lots of extra money to $2 billion in the bank, the governor said. And also, of course, we had the lottery. We always had these things promised in Oklahoma, like we're only going to build one turnpike, and then we're going to get it paid off, and we're not going to build anymore. And that was like 1955, and we're still building turnpike. It's two sets of roads, the ones that are paid for and the ones that never get paid for. So I think we have enough money for the people in the rural areas not to worry about it much. A lot of them were, of course, Oklahoma being a rural state, most of them in the old days, the Baptist church was only a block away, which wasn't too bad. They come down and talk to us as well as the other different churches would before the people who decided in California and New York we shouldn't have Jesus in the public schools. So one of the things that, in my opinion, since I think I'm smarter than the people at the Supreme Court, the government was to protect the churches in the 13 states. It was not to get in there, rule it illegal, not to be atheistic by whatever means, that we should do what we want. This also goes along with some of the unfunded mandates. The superintendents here informed me, you used to call that slavery when you work for nothing, right? So we need to get rid of those. The tax part needs to be overhauled to a big extent, and people like Epic shouldn't be able to make off with money they don't know about. But having worked for government, Department of Transportation, Tax Commission for a long time, all these agencies kept extra money in their bank accounts like the health department because they couldn't trust the legislature and they might want to cut out part of their funding. So we need to keep on having the audits done. So the biggest thing we can do is keep track of the money. That was a big deal under Nixon. Follow the money, see where it is, see who gets it, and see who's hoodwinking our politicians, some of whom rely on trust. So being a little Machiavellian, don't trust anybody.
Thank you, Mr. Crozier. Secretary Walters.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you all for being here. Thank you, Augusta, for moderating. Erica, thank you for all the work that you've done to put this together. Thank you, Superintendent Holder, for having us here, and great school system here. Love to hear the work that's going on here. And, you know, the reason I'm running is because I want the best education for every single Oklahoma child. And the reason that I was supportive of Senate Bill 1647, the reason why I believe that we need these options for parents is because what I want for every parent is the best opportunity at success in education as possible for their child. And if a parent wants to choose a different option for their kids, I absolutely think they should be able to. Now, like I said, we have a lot of great schools in the state. We have a lot of great public schools in the state, again, that have great programs. But as I talk to parents, there's always these circumstances where they come to me with a specific situation where they want a different school for their child. That bill was crafted in a way that would not impact any school that didn't lose children to go to another school. So the rural schools, if there weren't going to be students that left that school, they were not going to be financially impacted by that bill. That was clearly laid out in the way the bill was drafted. It was clearly laid out in the way the bill was debated. And so that's what I think when we talk about education, we need to be ensuring that every child has an opportunity at success. And every child's different. Every child's unique. I got 4 little ones at home. I got a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and about to be a 1-year-old here next week. And those kids are very different. And the way that they've already started their learning experiences are very unique. And so that's why I think we've got to continue to make sure that parents have all options on the table so that if they think that their child needs a different type of learning environment, and again, you know, we talk a lot about school choice being choosing schools. I think it's very important the pathways inside schools. You know, I had a kid, one of the students that I had right before graduation came up to me and apologized to me that he wasn't going to go to college. Said he wanted to be a welder, and he found this company that would pay for his welding certification. I thought that was great. I thought it was fantastic. But, you know, he thought that that was the only path for him. We need to continue to have multiple paths open so that every kid can be successful in our education system.
Thank you, Secretary Walters. Dr. Grace, your response?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Moving on to the next. This question about student mental health is a combination of 2 submitted by Claudia, a community member and former educator from Norman, and Amy from Northwest Oklahoma. According to recent data released by the National Survey of Children's Health, Oklahoma ranks first in the nation for children with an adverse childhood experience score of 2 or more. Children with an ACE score of 4 or higher are 20 times more likely than the general population to be incarcerated at some point in their life. Counseling and other mental health interventions are most effective in treating childhood trauma, but many children, particularly in rural Oklahoma, face significant barriers to accessing mental health care. Over the past 5 years, efforts to support student mental health have been bolstered through federally funded programs such as Project Aware and the School Counselor Corps. If elected as State Superintendent of Public Instruction, what is your plan to address access to mental health care and continue this work once federal funding for current programs is gone? Dr. Cox, you're first.
Yes, and I think we still need to make an investment in our counseling programs. I'm one of the schools that applied for the Counselor Corps grant, and my background is actually, I have a master's in counseling, so I understand the mental health of our children and even our staff that we have. And so, but I have a problem with how it's being pushed into our schools. And at the beginning, I was excited about receiving the money for Counselor Corps, but then there's an agenda behind that, which actually we're trying to make sure every child has a problem, and you try to use group sessions for those counselors. And I bought into the Counselor Corps because I wanted to help individual children, ones that parents actually called and said, can you help my child? And ones that we saw were struggling academically that we could help with. So what we've just said is that, yes, we have the money, and we may have to give it back if they tell us that they want us to push it into the classrooms. But I think this mental health is so important. And we see it at our small rural school through the pandemic, just the isolation that our kids have had. Just them being at home away from their friends. It's caused tendencies that cause depression and anxiety in our children. And I think we're coming out of that, but I think we need to be able to counsel kids without an agenda. So being someone who's a proponent of counseling, I think that as state superintendent, after these next 2 years are over, after the grant runs out, I think that's something that will be an initiative that I will keep pushing and actually try to find more counselors, because right now we have a shortage in all areas, and especially in counseling right now, to help our kids. So it has to be a focus, and after what we watched last week happen, we've got to have people there to not only help our kids, but help our parents and our staff go through those, because there's a lot of things going through their mind right now, and parents just want to know that their kids are going to be safe. Bottom line, they want to know they can drop them off in the morning and pick them up in the evening. And so that's what we've got to make sure. We've got to look at so many different issues to take care of that.
And a follow-up, Dr. Cox, what was the agenda that you perceived in your school counselor corps program in your school?
I just saw a national push to make it look like every child has an issue. And so when you go into the classroom and do group counseling with an entire class of fifth graders, are you going in there to see if they have problems? And if they don't have problems, do you stir emotions where they think they have problems? And so I think it's so important to have counseling, but I don't want to create problems that are not there. And so I think that is an outside agenda to come in, but we really need to focus back on what does an individual child need, not what a group needs. And also, our parents need to be aware of any time that their child is being counseled. They need to be aware, and it needs to be transparent that we're taking care of our children. And most of our rural schools do that. Most of our rural schools have great communication with our parents. But when you get into inner cities, it's a little bit different.
Thank you, Dr.
Welcome.
Cox. Okay.
Was I close enough right there? Okay.
I think if you just lean forward and speak into the mic, you should be okay.
Very
Yeah.
good.
Thank you. Mr. Crozier.
Well, I think microphones are like bananas. You have to hold them real close to your mouth or nobody can hear you. Having been married to a mental patient and a number of mental people in my family, some of whom committed suicides, so I've been around mental health problems for a long time in different ways. Even back in the 40s and 50s, tried to find everything somebody in Oklahoma could rally around so they had some kind of identification. Free societies, they call that anomie. Nobody has any hope and they don't know for sure what they can hang on to. Of course, religion helps a lot with that. Well, I think that's what we need to do. That project, we try to get something like the other states have where they all rally around. The only thing the people and professors at OU could get was the OU football team in the 50s. And of course, they were in national championships several times. There's some of us that still like OU football who went there, even though OSU was coming up. The British will always say, and what they said before about Americans will do the right thing after we've tried everything else. They need to be self-actualized in what they're doing. As far as I'm concerned, the individual education plans, IEP, are not adequate for mental patients. And even back in the 60s when I used to work with my engineer computer friends when they still had punch cards, we used to figure out, well, if the government wanted to spy on you, what would they do? Well, they would just look for the key words. And that's not what we've been doing. Social networking is what example, and you do political science is an example of pure democracy. Everybody gets to say what they want regardless of what it is. I have to remind people we have a republic where we elect elected officials, like the ones here. They decide by committees or study groups on what they need to do best. So this is one of the things that we have to watch with our young people since we stop having the draft votes against them. Start doing these other things and pay attention to what's going on and make sure we are not our own enemy, that we focus on our true objectives.
Thank you. Secretary Walters.
You know, this is one of my big concerns about federal money coming into our schools, is what is the agenda by the feds that they're trying to dictate on our schools. And the reality is they call them all these nice programs, but then you get in, this is where we found critical race theory, this is some of the issues we see now, is that they start embedding all of these things and say, well, if you want this federal money, you've got to jump through this hoop, and you've got to jump through that hoop, and you actually got to do this and that. So I'm very concerned just high level at taking federal money, period, because of what we've seen from the feds lately, and it's just getting worse under this Biden administration, just terrible nonsense coming from them. And this is part of was my major concern when we saw so many schools shut down for so long during the pandemic, is especially Tulsa Public Schools, which stayed closed nearly a calendar year, which is why I was very publicly pushing them to open their schools, as we had kids in isolation for large amounts of time. We had kids that were put in positions that struggled mightily with mental health, not being able to see their teachers, not being able to have any sense of normalcy, not being around their friends. And I think we're really seeing that played out today because of that. Now, we had a lot of great schools, especially in the rural areas of the state, that really stayed open through most of the pandemic. But again, we had some of our largest school systems that shut down for a significant amount of time. I think it greatly impacted our kids' mental health. I am concerned about that. And one of the things that we've got to do, and this is why I'm so passionate about ensuring that parents are empowered in their kids' education, that their parents are a part of what's going on in the school, that we have full transparency of what's going on in the school, because the parents are the ones that are going to be the people that are most likely to help their kid in a mental health situation, most able to make sure that those concerns are addressed. And the other part of that is making sure that we're supporting our teachers, that our teachers have the resources to be successful in the classroom, that our teachers aren't overstressed in a way that they can't attend the needs of every individual child. And that's part of why I'm so passionate about the audit of the State Department of Education, to ensure money's getting to the classroom so teachers can be successful with their kids, because they can make a tremendous impact in the kids' lives.
Thank you, Secretary Walters. Dr. Cox, your response?
It's my turn. Sorry.
Okay. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, moving around the time. I'm so sorry. Dr. Grace, go ahead.
That's perfectly fine. Mental health of our students is something that is tremendously impacting our classrooms, and I'm also concerned about the secondary trauma that often our teachers are experiencing as a result of working with these students with some of the mental health aspects and the trauma that they're experiencing, because teachers take the care of kids very seriously. They're there to meet the needs of their students for learning, but they also are there to be that extra person that's an advocate for a child in trying to meet their needs. And so I think when we talk about these AWARE grants expiring, one of the things we have to continue to do is look at how do we build a partnership, and there already is one, but how do you strengthen the partnership? How do you work together with the Department of Mental Health that we have in our state? How do we work with another agency and partner together to meet the needs of Oklahomans across the state? I think that's the important piece here. When we talk about the AWARE grant, it provides that virtual counseling experience for students, because we have deserts across the state where we don't have care and providers. So this is something we have to continue doing. For years, OSU has had a telemedicine program, and that's how they've trained physicians in rural parts of the state. So we have to be aware that we have these deserts of providers, and we have to continue to do our part to partner with others to make these things an option. But I completely agree with some of the things that have been said. When we start into intensive counseling pieces, we must have parents as a partner in the process. For many of our students troubled with mental health, the parents also have their own struggles. So having the parents partner with you in that process, and having the parents also come in for knowing how to work through things, can be a really important part. So it's not just about helping do the work with this child, but we can also help a family sometimes that may be struggling with things. So I think it's important that we've got to address all aspects of this. We've got to provide programs for teachers. We're working on an employee assistance program that would also provide those opportunities for teachers. So I think it's the whole piece, but yes, parents must be at the table in a partnership.
All right, thank you, Dr. Grace. Dr. Cox.
Yes, I'd just like to emphasize that mental health and counseling is extremely important, and especially after what we went through last week, and just the fear that I've been hearing of kids not wanting to come back to school, wanting to feel safe. Parents, can they trust us to bring their child back? And it was mentioned school choice is very important, but we do have the best school choice probably in the nation, because our parents have all choices to take their kids to. And so I think we need to support our parents on their decision, and exactly what April said, we need to bring our families in and really focus on what can we do to help them as far as counseling goes, but further with our teachers who are having to deal with this on a daily basis and helping their kids. I think we need to have someone there as support. So it's extremely important as State Superintendent that I will continue to provide these resources even after the grants are done, and we'll put focus on helping the mental health of our children.
Thank you. And I have a follow-up for Secretary Walters. In place of allowing some federally funded counseling programs to expire, what would you replace counseling services with state dollars in public schools, or what would your solution be? Is that something you would address?
Yeah, I mean, this is part of the problem with taking federal dollars, is they get you on the hook and they say, we're going to pay for this for 2 years, and then it's up to you. So you're going to fire all these people you just hired? Are you going to continue having these programs going? What are you going to do? And so it puts everybody in a tough situation when we take in a scenario like this. So what I'm very hopeful of is the audit that the governor and I called of the State Department of Education will help us find a lot more money in that department that can be used, a better use for schools. When I talk to school leaders all over the state, I hear them talking about their frustration with not getting help from the Department of Education. I don't know what Joy Hoffmeister's been doing over there, but it hasn't been helping our schools. So we need to be looking at those dollars. We need to make sure those dollars have been wisely spent. We need to make sure that our schools are being supported through the department, which is heavily funded, to ensure that every school has what they need to be successful. Every teacher has what they need to be successful. Every administrator has someone that they can work with to be successful. And frankly, it hasn't been going on. So what we need to be doing is getting the most out of the money we have in the education system to make sure that every single child has an opportunity of success in our schools.
Thank you. Next question. This question about the A to F state report cards was submitted by Sandra, a teacher and parent from Shawnee. The accuracy of the Oklahoma A to F school report card system is hotly debated in education policy circles. This evaluation is used to present the quality of a school district to the public. Opponents of the A to F system say it does not give an accurate reflection of school quality because it does not take into account the challenges students face in their personal lives. In general, our rural and urban districts have higher poverty rates than suburban districts. Some argue the unique problems that come with high poverty areas seem to be directly reflected in the A to F report card rankings. This is a two-part question. Do you believe it's fair to grade all schools equally using the A to F report card system? And what would you do to address concerns about this evaluation method? First, Mr. Crozier.
Well, once upon a time, in a land far and away, about 50 years ago, I was probably and still am the only district supervisor for National Assessment of Educational Progress. One of the things I noticed was the people in the South and the West speak different languages than the people in the Northeast. I also don't like the grading system. I always like pass or fail. So one of my examples I use, since I also used to work for astronaut General Tom Stafford, went around the moon before Armstrong did. He was supposed to walk on the moon, but we lost some people, which happens occasionally when you're flying out in space. And they asked him how difficult it was to speak Russian. He said, well, it's like this, Bill. He said, I speak Okie. So there is a difference in the way you read those tests and the way that you grade them. Lower tests, all you have to do, like the military, like we did it, many of it's pass or fail. Keep on doing it till you can get it done, and then when you got it memorized, you can do it. Because I had a teacher for a father, he made me memorize all the history books before I went to school in the first grade, and I didn't have to study American history till I was a senior. Well, the things that we need to do to help things. Some of the Zoom courses and other classes that people were taking, I think, cause this separation and disconnection in our society, and we need to be together. Even though we can't work on everything together, we can agree to disagree, or I want to say one of the Southern politicians in the American Revolution said, I may not agree with what you say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. Well, I've been telling some of my real close friends that didn't want to wear a mask and are worried about the pandemic was that my grandmother didn't die of the 1918 flu. I think she was pregnant with my dad. His health wasn't good enough to serve in World War II. But freedom to choose, or give me freedom or give me death, may not be a choice anymore.
Thank you. Secretary Walters.
You know, so I've got several problems with the A to F report card, but I'm just going to jump right into this aspect of it. I think we need to do a serious look at the way we're assessing students and the way that that data, that information is transferred and available, number one, to parents to have an understanding of how their kids are doing, but number two, to teachers, to administrators, so that they can actually utilize the data and make decisions and determinations in closer to real time rather than getting a test back much later in the year that doesn't much help them on what they're doing inside their school. So I think we need to do a deep dive. We do need to be checking student performance and see how students are doing. And I do want to make this point as well. Students that come from troubled backgrounds, from difficult personal backgrounds, and again, I've taught in multiple schools with high poverty. I understand some of those difficulties that are there. Those students need those high expectations just as bad as any other student. We have to have high expectations on our kids. We need to be emphasizing academic growth in the way that we assess kids. We need to be ensuring that students are moving forward or progressing in a very good way towards an end goal. And I think we have to be really, really intentional about, are we measuring the things that we want to measure that are important to us? And are we getting those results back to parents so that they know how their kids are doing? And then number two, are we getting them back to schools, school leaders, teachers, so that they can utilize that data and inform their decision-making and inform their practices? And that's something that we can do. So we need to be doing a deep dive on the school report card. There's several criteria on there that don't make a lot of sense, and we can absolutely make this a tool that parents use and that teachers use. So it all needs to be changed for that to happen.
Thank you. Dr. Grace.
Well, a single grade indicator is not going to be reflective of all the things that go in a school. So we know that there are issues with A through F, and I think there are, as has been mentioned, there are a lot of opportunities for us to sort of revamp that, look at it, reset it, recalibrate it. We need to be using growth measurement assessments, things that measure the growth of every student, because we need to be advancing every challenged student, but we need to be challenging every advanced student. I worry with some of the tests we have right now that doesn't always happen like it needs to. So we've got to get intensely focused on academic rigor and lifting it for all students. We absolutely cannot afford to lower the bar. We must set the expectation high for all kids. We know that kids can rise to the challenge. We believe every child can learn regardless of their background. We just know they learn at different times and they come to us at different points. So a growth measurement tool is what we have to go to and we have to look at. We know that there's opportunity within A through F to recalibrate it and make it something, again, that is usable for parents and for teachers and administrators. But the bottom line is we've got to have a different assessment than the one we're using. I'm not a big believer either in a bell curve, and it's set on a bell curve. So we've got lots of problems with how it's set up, and it's time to really dig into it and look at it and make it a more useful tool and something that's more beneficial, as well as get testing results in a more timely manner so that interventions can be made or advancements can be done for students who are already on target. We must do a better job of continuing to diversify this, and again, challenging those students that are advanced and advancing those students that are challenged. It has to be part of the mission that we do, and it's time that we really reimagine, redesign, and redefine what we want from Oklahoma educational outcomes.
Thank you. Dr. Cox.
Yes, I've been discussing the A through F for about 8 years now, and basically haven't changed my opinion. We just need to eliminate it. The businesses out through our communities, they don't like the A through F because it really doesn't grade what the school actually is. You can be a C school, but be an excellent school, and people don't understand that. And so when you can go from a B to an A to a D in 3 years, there's something wrong with that scoring with the same teachers teaching. And so it was discussed about expectations. We have the highest expectations. Teachers go into this business with high expectations of their children. they should do that, or they shouldn't be in the business. So I really have a problem with people saying that, we don't have high expectations of our kids, and that's been said, but we do. At my school, we get frustrated because we have so high expectations, but we try to push our kids to get there. The A through F system should be eliminated, and so what are we going to do? I want to match it up with the growth model of testing and get rid of the end of the year tests, so we get away from test prep and actually teach to the last part till the end of the school year, and that way we don't have third graders crying the night before they take a test, and really take away their love for learning. And so I want to make a growth model. We may be getting into that a little bit, but we can do a dashboard instead of a through F system where a parent can actually see how their child's doing compared to the other children in the classroom. I want a parent to be able to go, well, my child's in third grade, this is how they're doing in math, this is how they compare with the students in their class, and this is how they're doing across the state. That's what needs to be seen. With A through F, you can't see any of that. So I want to bring something that's really valuable. If we're going to do something with our money, if we're going to spend millions of dollars on these tests, we need to do something valuable with the data that we get from that.
Thank you. Mr. Crozier.
Well, one of the things I used to do on my grades, besides help people that didn't think they were doing too well on the first test, was to, and when we did the numbers on the percentages, was instead of having like 100 to 90, I'd make 3 or 4 different points in there. So that when it came to final time, of course, being a Christian here, we always have prayer in the school as long as you have tests, maybe. But anyway, as long as they fell within that category of the scores, if they made 89 instead of a 90, they still got an A. And that comes from me having taken courses in the past where you miss things by 1 point, or get graded down because you're right-wing, radical Christian Republican, and disagree that the Russian army is not going to move into Czechoslovakia. So we need to make sure they can do the best they can on the test. As far as I'm concerned, like I used to do with my prisoners in the prisons in Oklahoma, was you take the test until you pass it, and they would skip 2 or 3 classes and go ahead and take the GED and pass it.
Thank you. Next question about teacher retention and recruitment. This question about teacher retention and recruitment was submitted by Claudia, a community member and former educator from Norman. Oklahoma schools are struggling with both recruitment and retention of teachers. The largest teachers union in Oklahoma, the Oklahoma Education Association, said this week that retention issues in Oklahoma's teacher corps are linked to lower than regional average pay and harmful political rhetoric directed at teachers and schools. New teachers are joining the profession at about 50% the rate that teachers are leaving. The rates of emergency certified teachers is increasing, while the number of graduates from college teacher preparatory programs is declining. What do you feel are the major reasons why high school graduates are not entering the education field? And as State Superintendent of Public Instruction, how will you strengthen the certified teacher pipeline in Oklahoma from pre-service to career educator? First, Secretary Walters.
Great question. So number one, just to go through, we've done a lot of data, a lot of research into, the teacher shortage here in the state, and the number one thing you see is that they feel that there's a lack of supports for them inside their school. And so this is one of the things that we have got to ensure, that resources are getting to the classroom, that we are ensuring that we are doing all that we can to support teachers inside their district so that they're being onboarded properly, they're getting the professional development. I hear this all over the state. Teachers feel that they need better professional development. We need to make sure that we're doing those things so that a teacher, you got folks that are going into the profession, they know they want to be a teacher, they know they want to impact students' lives, and they get in the profession, and there's a lack of discipline. We hear that a lot. There's lack of administrative support, lack of training to help them grow into their position. I think that's very, very important. That's the number one thing we hear. We also have to ensure that we have pathways for teachers to make more money. This is something I'm very excited about. The bill that passed this year, House Bill 3488, was something the governor and I were pushing very strong to give teachers a pathway to make up to $100,000. If they want to move to this path, I hate that the choices for teachers are, if you want to make a lot more money, go become an administrator. I want our great teachers to stay in the classroom. The impact a great teacher has is tremendous, but all of our incentives are financial incentives are to leave to go make more money. I am thankful for the good administrators that go to that line of work, but But teaching is a skill and being a good administrator, they're two different skill sets. I want that pathway for teachers. I think it helps recruitment. I think we can help pull teachers in that profession. I think with this teacher leader role, those teachers can help train new teachers, help onboard new teachers, help co-teach with other teachers, and help provide those supports. But we have got to do something about recruiting, retaining, and then supporting teachers, because this is a serious issue. When we talk about the number one factor inside a school of student success, it is the quality of that teacher in the classroom, and we've got to make sure we're getting good folks in the profession and they're supported.
Thank you. Secretary Walters, a follow-up question. Some of the concerns from districts with House Bill 4388 is that districts will have to come up with the matching money to get that those tax commission dollars.
Yep.
That could be a barrier.
Yes.
And some of those longtime educators will now be taking hours out of the classroom to go mentor. There's a question of workload. Talk a little bit about how you see those concerns. What's your response?
Absolutely. Schools should be spending more on teacher pay. Absolutely. We have seen tremendous administrative growth over the last 10 years. We have not seen the growth in this teaching staff. More money should be spent inside our school budgets to teacher pay. I believe that 100%. Will we match it as a state to help even further bolster that? Absolutely. There is no better investment inside the school than to make sure that their teachers are being paid and that their teachers are being supported to be successful in the room with the kids. The magic happens, the learning happens inside a classroom with the teacher and the kids. We have over $2 billion that's unspent in COVID aid to schools. We have 5 of the last 6 years, the education budget has went up, and we should continue to invest in education. But we should also continue to ensure that those investments make it to our teachers and give them the potential and the ability to have flexibilities in their day so they can help other teachers, they can help develop curriculum, they can help co-teach. That needs to be, when we're talking about how we move forward as a state, when we talk about how to significantly improve student outcomes, we have to find ways to help our teachers, support our teachers for the use of those students to have the best learning possible.
Thank you. Dr. Grace.
Well, absolutely, the number one most important thing we can spend money on is resources and support for teachers and on our teachers and getting money into the classroom. So there's no argument here about that. But I think we all have to remember, too, this year what we saw was we got a flat budget in education with an 8% inflation rate. Makes it extremely difficult because our operational costs are increasing. And so to go now find extra funds to incentivize, and now we've got also put together a program to sort of tap into these funds that we saw in that bill. There may be great opportunity with that bill in the future, but right now I think schools are doing all they can to get back on track after COVID, and we've just, again, got a flat budget that really is not a flat budget because we have an 8% inflation rate. So at the same time, we've got to look at every aspect of that. But recruiting and retention is extremely important, and this is way more intense of a question than a 2-minute response, I can tell you that. But we've got to have multiple layers and avenues for people to get into the profession. We've got to keep multiple on-ramps like we have. But we have got to get serious about incentivizing the traditional pathway. How do we do that? We saw some bills this year pass that would absolutely give teacher scholarships and things like that. Those are some of the things that may compel our young people going forward. As we use intensive internships and apprenticeships in our schools for pathways, that's another way for us to get young people involved in it. I've been working with a group to put together a plan, a Teach for Oklahoma plan that would be similar to Teach for America, but it would be Teach for Oklahoma and be concentrated on Oklahoma with some of those same pieces to it. So again, I think multiple pathways. We've got to continue to open up every opportunity we can to get people highly qualified and highly trained. We know that there's both an art and a science to teaching. There's something that people have to be trained on to do some parts well, and there's some parts they may be intuitive. Absolutely, we've got to put money and resources in teachers, but in teacher retention and recruitment, we've got to incentivize step 5, step 10, step 15, step 20, step 25 to keep people in the profession. We also need to restore national board stipends because those are important, and that's a highly trained certification that teachers receive.
Dr. Grace, would you support increasing teacher salaries across the board like we saw several years ago with legislative action?
I do, but I do also think we need to be strategic and specific at the same time. So we need to do incremental investments instead of big dumps. We've got to continue. This has got to be something we can count on and be consistent about. But I do think we've got to also really incentivize, like a step 5, a step 10, a step 15, a step 20. We've got to incentivize people staying in the profession as well. So while we still need across-the-board pay increases because we're now lagging again in the region, we also have to be, I think, very intentional about keeping our best folks here in the classroom as long as we can, too. So I think it's both pieces that we've got to do.
Thank you. Dr. Cox.
Okay, so the Secretary and I have had this conversation at several forums, and so I would just like to ask the question, who here in Sulphur is going to be the one teacher that gets the 100,000? Who is going to pick that? Is the superintendent going to pick that? Is the school board going to pick that? There's so many problems with picking one person out of a school district to make the 100,000, and the rest of the teachers are making 45. So I've got a real problem with it, and what I've been saying, and in these discussions, is that if we have the money to do the matching funds, why don't we go ahead and put those into raising the salary up for all teachers? And so 8 years ago, I was advocating, we were at $32,060, I believe, and I was advocating for $40,000 for our teachers to entice them and keep them in the system. Now, 8 years later, I'm saying $40,000 is not enough. $50,000 should be the base level for a teacher to come in, because basically if you get trade certification, which I am pushing as hard as I can across this state, you can come out of there and make $50,000, $60,000, or you can go to work at fast food and make $35,000 with nobody on your back at all. So we've got to move the bar to the $50,000. I love the graduated skill step for every 3 years. Then you increase it maybe $1,000 so that teachers can be incentivized to go, well, if I stay here 3, I'll get another $1,000 bump. Right now we're getting $350 to $420 bump every year. So, and which is, you don't even see that in your paycheck. So I have a problem with that bill. If we have the money to do it, let's go ahead and raise the pay scale up and keep those teachers in. The other thing, that 18-year-old that's going to go to college that we're trying to get to become teachers, they're looking at the pay increases. They're looking at the pay that they may have. Do they go to college 4 years before they can make $40,000? Or do they go automatically to work and make $35,000, or do they get trade certificate and go $50,000? So we desperately have to do something. So right now we have 3,500 teachers retiring, and we only have 1,200 to replace. So this is a significant problem, a concern that we're going to have to make sure that we take care of this year.
Thank you. Mr. Crozier.
Well, my outlook's a little bit different since my dad taught school at one of them. Minco High School for 10 years, South Oklahoma City for 4 or 5 years before he went to UCO and became chairman of political science. Knew a lot about government. Later he said he used to run the political science department at UCO. Then they said he used to run the school, and we put George and I in. We got all the parking lots paved and built all the buildings, and it became a first-class school. So he said not only did he help run the school, he helped run the state. We started programs on city management, on how to get the regulations printed correctly. But one of the things he always had a problem with, and it was in South Oklahoma City at Roosevelt, was the truck driving jobs that were available to students' parents. So they were always giving the teachers a hard time because they weren't making as much as the truck drivers. So I had to go drive them for a year, even though I used to be an accident investigator for the DOT, mainly truck wrecks. You know, I get 4 or 5 calls a week. Well, would you like to drive trucks for us again from Laredo to Detroit? Make $100 a year? The answer is no, because I'm never home, but I might do it anyway. Depends on after the elections. We'll see what goes on. But that's beyond with it. I don't care about the regional average. We're getting new people in. We're getting new business. We're building the motion picture industry. We may build electric cars, even though they didn't build mine. Mine became the Prius, 1995. So it needs to be on that top level. The question is, when we still kind of have a socialist system of public schools, unlike business where you pay people to do the jobs that they are qualified to do, we have all these big government loans. Of course, Big Bad Biden is trying to wipe those out. And they probably should be, but on the other hand, you can give the businesses credit for it. So the battle with the OEA has gone on for years. It's not just the pay, it's the working conditions. And we basically use the one-room schoolhouse management since about, 1812 or something like that. So the first company I worked for, National Assessment of Education, Westinghouse Learning Corporation, Deming were the principals. that were used to surpass our manufacturing projects in the United States by China and Japan.
Thank you. Your rebuttal, Secretary Walters.
I feel like Mr. Crozier's putting me to shame. I'm the old history teacher, but you're the one always dropping all the history lines. And okay, but yeah. So just to wrap that up,
I like him.
I am passionate that we have to look at what we're doing and do things differently in order to improve our education system. We're 49th in our student outcomes. 49th. Oklahoma's the greatest state in the country to live. Absolutely love living in Oklahoma. I love going into communities. I see communities that want to support their local schools. I see parents that want to be more involved in their kids' education. I hear teachers that are passionate about teaching their kids. But our system has not been working to produce the outcomes that we desire for our kids. So we have to start looking at things differently. Absolutely, we need to be paying all teachers better. We also need to be ensuring that the best teachers, the teachers that want to go above and beyond, the teachers that want to help train and onboard other teachers, the teachers that want to really work in this kind of more of a leadership role, have pathways to do that, because those type of teachers are going to make a tremendous impact, not only for their students, but for the culture of their schools.
Thank you. Next question. This question about support staff was submitted by Jamie, a teacher from Kingston. Oklahoma's public schools cannot function without support staff and paraprofessionals. Paraprofessionals also play a vital role in the special education support system. Recent reports from Ed Week show that Oklahoma's school support staff make the second lowest salary in the nation, about $26,000 annually. As Superintendent of Public Instruction, how would you address this? First, Dr. Grace.
Well, I think this is absolutely something that we've got to continue to work toward with legislatures and try to get more funding for support raises. We focused on teachers as we should have, because we were very lagging behind there. But our support staff, absolutely, we cannot keep the doors open without them either. They're the ones that drive the buses, they help us do the meals, they support the special education students. So all of those folks are extremely important. And across the board in education, with our support staff and teachers, we've got to work better and harder on getting the pay up. And so absolutely would support legislation on that. I'd be working to try to get that done. We saw some bills this year that introduced it, but there didn't seem to be an appetite for that to happen this year. But I think it's something we've got to keep working on. We have bus driver shortages. We have every kind of shortage you can imagine with support staff as well. So it's not only a teacher shortage problem, it's a shortage across everything. And I agree with the individual who put in the question. We've got to do better with support pay as well. It's something we've got to keep working on.
Thank you. Dr. Cox.
Yes, I think support staff are a foundation of our schools. We absolutely can't do without support staff. But right now, I'm looking for 3 paras. I'm looking for a office assistant. We're always looking for qualified people to come in, quality people to come in and work. And so it's extremely frustrating, and it has to be out through all rural Oklahoma and even inner cities to find people that we can trust to come in and work in our schools. What we're facing is paying our support staff $15 an hour, and then right down the road they can make $18 an hour or $20 an hour. So everybody's fighting for that one person. It's extremely hard to find a bus driver, a cook, a janitorial person. And so this is just something that until this election never really has been focused on before. So I am really proud that now we're looking at the people that make the school run, that really help our teachers. My teachers will tell you they can't survive without their teachers' assistants. We provide one assistant for every teacher that we have to help take care of them, help take care of the kids. But we're getting where we can't find those people anymore. So just because of the pay and just because of basically people don't want to go back to work yet. The pandemic really kept a lot of people home. So I am very supportive, and as state superintendent, that is something I will focus on trying to at least get the minimum up to 15, but we've got to compete with the 18 and the $20, and plus quality of work, environment of work, and I think that's up to the local superintendent and administration to make it a quality environment, a family environment for those people to come to work. So yes, that will be something that I will be pushing to help support staff. As a working superintendent, I just understand their value. I just know what they do for us, because I would easily be that person out there that's cleaning the bathrooms and sweeping the floors and driving the bus. I'm easily that person. So yes, I put great value in our support staff, and I will be their advocate as state superintendent.
Thank you. Mr. Crozier.
support staff. I like the ones that I had that were helping me at Blanchard, and also the ones that were helping me at Guthrie. To me, these could be potential roles for future teachers because they get the experience. You need to get them the courses some way, whether you Zoom it or whether you do it on paper correspondence courses so they can work their way up. I mean, when we had support staff, we didn't really do that at Minco too much. But I was looking at the truck driving jobs. I probably applied for 10 or 12 of those. The special ed jobs, applied for 500, got 4 phone calls, 2 interviews. Truck driving jobs, I got 5 or 6 or 7 calls a week wanting me to go do something, drive trucks for them, try not to have wrecks and accidents. But that could be a place where you could train the people who want to be teachers in their local areas. Of course, when the gas prices went up before, Blanchard was nice to me. They said, well, can't afford to drive to work. How about driving the buses, pick up kids in the morning, evening, so I can get up like we used to, and we had to pick cotton in the old days, or chop cotton. Get up, drive to Blanchard, get on the bus, pick up the kids, walk from the bus to the classroom, teach classes all day in special ed, get through with the day, go out on the buses, take all the kids home, and the cops only followed me once whenever I had a flat tire on my bus. So we need to look at that. You find the job courses and the ways they can do things. A lot of these courses now, we know how Zoom is. This is good to be a training ground for future teachers. Money is big competition, and that's always going to be a problem unless we figure out how to come up with the money better. So one of the old governor candidates used to say, Oklahoma's not a poor state, we're a poor managed state. A lot of our ideas that we have are real simple. They just don't work. We need to figure out how to pay people, treat people right, and still some of the best things is people get self-actualized in jobs that they really like. The teachers I had taught forever. People look at my resume and say, have you done all these things? Well, only in one lifetime, but I'm not dead yet.
Thank you. Secretary Walters.
So many of support staff that I'm going to talk about two critical issues here that I see with support staff. One is the ability for them to make more pay doing other things. We've seen that a lot with transportation, keeping a bus driver with the pay now for CDL licensed drivers across the state is just unbelievable what they can make somewhere else. So we've been trying to find ways to help districts innovate in how they transport kids, how they pay bus drivers, things like that. I think we have to continue down that path of how do we continue to find solutions to the transportation issue in schools. And the other is, I think you're exactly right. We've got paraprofessionals inside our schools that would love to move into being teachers where they get more pay, they get more benefits, they get things like that. But again, they are working an 8 to 4 type job. How can they do that? I've been working with colleges across the state to try to set up these programs. I know there have been some schools taking advantage of this across the state to start allowing their paras a degree pathway, because these are folks that love working with kids, they're engaged in the school, they're part of the school culture, they're part of the school community, and if we can, that's a great benefit for them to say, hey, within 2 years, what if we were able to help you get a degree where your pay does bump up tremendously and we backfill the teacher shortage area? Then what if we start backfilling the paras and we start getting folks moving into there with a career pathway that says, well, in a few years, we can even help you advance into being a classroom teacher. I have heard from so many superintendents across the state that have a story of a paraprofessional that got a degree and came back and was a full-time teacher and one of their best teachers. And so I think we've got to continue to look at these problems and find solutions, find pathways to really help us get out of these type of issues. I think that is a key area that we could focus on. That is giving paraprofessionals pathways to becoming teachers. It would be faster than taking someone at 18 and 19 to get there. You know that they are already embedded in a school. They already understand the school environment. I think it is a very great solution. And again, it's not a total solution, but it is one great solution to help us with the teacher shortage.
So Secretary Walters, would you propose putting together a program to provide education for those paraprofessionals?
Yes, so one university I'm familiar with is Oklahoma Christian that has been doing this with paraprofessionals. They just had some graduate this year with a degree program, and what they did is they modified their scheduling so that students could take online courses, they could take courses at night, so that way you could be a paraprofessional from 8 to 3. I just think about my time when I was going through a college of education. I went to school all day and I worked at Walmart all night. Well, if you'd have given me the ability to go, well, I can work in a school during the day and finish up my degree at night, I'd have done that in a heartbeat. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to go work in a school. If we could provide opportunities like that so that folks are, while they're finishing a degree, are actually working inside a school, I think they're going to be so much more set up for success. I think that you're going to have these pathways that start opening up for people, and you're going to make college more affordable for them as well, because they're going to be having a paying job while they're working their way through finishing a degree program.
Thank you. Dr. Grace.
So there is a program. We actually piloted that program the last couple of years, and we have 5 paraprofessionals that just graduated that'll be teachers for our district this year. So it does work. That is also a very diverse workforce for us. It's also a very stable workforce. Oftentimes, they've been a paraprofessional for a really long time. They've been working with high-quality teachers, and so it's a great opportunity for those who want to do it. Not everyone wants to do it, and so it's one of those things we got to continue to also work for the pay. The other piece of that I would say that we have work to do on is how do then we help them pay for the tuition? How do we help them do that? So ours were very successful in that, but it also took us providing some supports around them. So providing some mentorship and helping them, because if they haven't been in school a while, then they may need some additional supports to get through it. So those are successful programs. It is one thing that we can do to help those folks as well, but I think there's still a lot of pay issues to address with our support staff.
Thank you. Next question. This question about standardized testing was submitted by Tammy, an elementary principal from Glencoe. What is your perspective on standardized testing? Dr. Cox.
How do I feel about standardized testing?
Yes.
I just feel like it doesn't do anything good for our schools. And I alluded to this earlier, that I want to do away with the A through F and the assessment system that we have and use a growth model throughout the year. Teachers are already gauging growth throughout the year. So why can't we, in this time of our lives, with the technology that we have, capture how our kids are doing on a daily basis? And basically the test we have now, and in my world, we don't see the results for 2 to 3 months. So why even open the boxes? Why even look at those results and waste your time on them? Because tests should really be used to guide instruction, to make immediate responses by teachers to instruct kids that might need help in another area. So end of the year assessments, I think, need to go. I think it's really archaic. I think all it does is just a talking point for people. I don't think it does anything good for a child. And all it does is make finger pointing. So I want to bring back what we have. I want to do away with test prepping. I want to actually be able to teach for the 2 months while we're test prepping, teach till the end of the day, end of the school year, and not do what we do now where we give this test, everybody's exhausted, everybody's wore out, and we babysit for 2 weeks and send them home. I want to be able to teach all the way up till the end of the year with no stress on our little ones that are taking it. Those 3rd graders that I was talking about, it's real. I see parents all across the state, they got tears in their eyes coming to me and going, my child was throwing up last night because they don't want to take the test. I got 2nd graders saying we don't want to go to 3rd grade because I have to take the test. Keep me in 2nd grade. That's a real thing. And it's all over the state on what people are talking about that. So let's bring meaning, let's bring purpose back to what we're doing in our schools. Let's really have something that brings value to helping with instruction and meeting the needs of a child, instead of just having something that people want to point fingers at and really has no purpose and waste of millions. I imagine it's over 20 million right now that we spend on testing. Let's put that back and use that for our classrooms and our kids.
Follow-up for you, Dr. Cox. Standardized testing, especially in the light of the pandemic, revealed some equity issues and served as an equity check on how students from different demographic and economic backgrounds were able to perform during really challenging conditions when their personal lives really came to the forefront in blocking them from their education potentially. So how would you, without standardized testing, work to ensure that all students are checked on to ensure that they have equitable access to their education?
Well, yeah, so we already do that. We do that every day, and of course the pandemic was abysmal. Online learning was terrible for our kids out in the country. You had to deal with all sorts of issues. You had to deal with, are the parents home with the kids while they're learning? Is a little 4th grader, is their parents there while they're trying to watch, or are they just trying to take care of younger brother or sister? Those are real items out there. So how do we really show for accountability? And I think what I'm talking about is a great accountability process where you're actually gauging immediately how a child's doing in a classroom. You can change instruction based upon where their needs are. And then also you can capture that data And really, accountability lies with the parent, because the parent brings the child to us and they expect an outcome. And if the parent's engaged like they should be able to look exactly where their child is in that classroom. So accountability is there in the system that I want. We just need to get rid of these meaningless, totally meaningless tests that we have at the end of the year.
Thank you. Mr. Crozier.
Well, having been a district supervisor for National Assessment of Education, which is still ongoing, continues, out of Princeton, New Jersey, I had all of Oklahoma and northern Texas. 1,000 miles a week wasn't very much to drive to get to all those schools and hire people to give the test. Part of the problem was that there was only one company doing the test. People who wrote the test were from the Northeast, so they didn't speak the same English we did. That made a difference on the scores, and nobody ever competed against it. So when I worked for General Stafford, I told them the contract for national assessment was up. Their subcontractor. It's the one up in Iowa City that grades all the tests. Used to be called Measurement Research Center. Then it was National Computer Systems. Then it was something else, so they changed their name, I think, all the time so they can keep the subcontracting jobs. However, once we made a bid on the contract, of course this is fake news, remember it's a lie, I'm not telling you this, okay? They wanted to know, some people in Boston wanted to bribe us to take the test and get it. They said their people were more powerful than the ones in New Jersey. So I went to Boston. That's when Whitey Bulger was there. I'm always around these places where people are, and then later we find out that they're killers. And the people met with us and wanted to pay us to do that contract and get it. Of course, we didn't follow through with it. The FBI wanted to know what it was. Many of the test questions were things that you wouldn't ordinarily ask. We didn't call them tests. We called them packages, because that's what you get at Christmas time, right? And the questionnaires on the back of the test, the one that bothered me the most was, do you mind working for a company that is not owned by Americans? This was the 1970s, so they already planned on putting those ideas in our heads and in the business heads so they can get out of the country and make more money and pay fewer taxes on it. We didn't get the contract. We got the cost and pricing data that showed who owned National Assessment of Education, and most of them were from Europe. They were not from the United States, so that's part of the problem. They don't speak English.
Thank you. Secretary Walters.
If killers are following you around, I don't know that you should come to any more of our forums, Mr. Crozier. That makes me a little nervous.
Do you want to know about the Zodiac?
I don't know. I don't know if I do or not. Okay, standardized testing. So, no, here's the thing. We have to ensure that we are assessing what is important for Oklahomans. We need to make sure that what we're doing is putting students on a pathway to be successful. Again, I think part of the issue with standardized testing is that standardization. Every kid's unique. Every kid's different. We all in this room and everyone watching online, you've had a different pathway to success. You might have taken twists and turns. It probably didn't turn out exactly the way that you thought. But what we do when we over-standardize education is we make a young person think, well, if you don't do this by this amount of time, or you don't do it exactly this way, well, then you're not going to be successful. That's just wrong. We all know that. We know that as parents. We know that as grandparents. As teachers, we see that. We have kids that find their own way. We find kids that are super creative and maybe don't test really well on this test. We find kids that are much more inclined in a project-type setting, working with a team. There's all these different unique skill sets, and we've seen manufacturers and companies across the country that have moved away from even requiring a college degree because they go, well, I don't know. We don't know if this is really what we want in the employees we're hiring. So what we've got to do is we've got to create an assessment system that ensures that parents know how their kids are doing. We've got to have a testing system that allows teachers to reflect on their practice and ensure that they can see how students are doing. And not something that's redundant, not something that's just put there at the end of the year, but something that's actually meaningful. And the way to do that is to ensure that we've got students mastering skills at those early grade levels, because again, I'm going to tell you, it's heartbreaking to hear parents talk about kids dropping out of school and about how their kids can't read in 4th and 5th and 6th grade and how they can't get their kid to go to school because their kid doesn't want to go to school to be embarrassed because he can't read. We have to master those skills early on, and then we've got to allow students to follow their talents, follow their skill sets, and start developing those much earlier in life so we don't have kids that are graduating from college with a degree that doesn't mean anything, that doesn't have a job in Oklahoma at the end of it, and then this kid is burdened with $100,000 in debt and has no career path moving forward. We have got to get out of that way of thinking.
Thank you. Dr. Grace.
Well, I think, most of us agree, it seems, that a growth measurement model makes more sense. So standardized testing, there's a certain amount of testing, as you mentioned, regarding equity and civil rights and just ensuring that we are checking up on kids. And that's part of the ESSA plan and some of those things. So we have to look at those things, we kind of have to tease that out and kind of unbundle it. ACT and SAT may continue to make sense for our college-bound high school students and for all high school students, because they may be able to handle college and may not be knowing that they do. So that may be one that continues to make sense for us. But growth measurement tools make the most sense in what a teacher does on a daily practice and what we want them to be doing on a daily practice. It's already been mentioned, being reflective on their work, knowing where students are. Again, I'll say it again, we must advance those that are challenged and challenge those that are advanced, and the only way we can do that is to continue to look at where a kid is on a daily basis. Benchmarking and growth measurement models are the tools that help us understand in real time how to make adjustments for students. Many of our schools already do this, so how do we bridge those two systems together, and how do we make it meaningful for teachers, for parents, for the public to show? We have some of the most rigorous academic standards in the nation. So it's time now for us to look at how we measure those in a way that can be meaningful but can ensure growth. An end-of-the-year instruction autopsy test that we get 2 months later does not help us adjust instruction for an individual student as they're going through the learning continuum. So we have to begin to look at things different. I'll say it again, we've got to reimagine, redesign, and redefine Oklahoma education to be more meaningful, and we've got to examine all aspects of it.
Thank you. Dr. Cox, your rebuttal.
Yes. One thing I haven't talked about on assessments is the assessment of our special needs children. We have IEPs. Most of you in here and out there understand the IEP, and it actually gauges growth of a student. But here we're expecting an 8th grader who's on 3rd grade math level on their IEP to pass an 8th grade math test. It's crazy, because think about what's the first thing that child thinks when they're sitting in front of that test? I'm going to what? Fail. And so it already puts a stigma on them, and it makes them feel like they're worthless. So what I want to do is actually find a system and actually use the IEP that we have and is already in the database to gauge the growth of that child and see if the school is doing the job they're supposed to. IEPs are actually made to be monitored by the parents and the teachers to see if growth is there, and if it's not, you adjust the IEP. So I want to be able to take care of those children. I was criticized vehemently by the State Department of Ed for coming out and saying they don't need to be taking those tests because those tests are inappropriate. And actually I said it was child abuse to make a child sit in front of a test that there is no way they can pass it. And so those are the children that I'm trying to take care of, and I'll just keep saying it even though I get criticized for it. We need to find a better method and use that IEP to gauge the growth of those children.
Right. Thank you. And we are now going to take a 10-minute restroom break. Thank you to all of our candidates. Take a few minutes. Everybody in the audience, there's bathrooms out in the lobby. And for everybody who's watching, leave your stream up. When we come back, we have lots more great questions. We'll be right back.
Okay, we've got 1 minute to go. If everybody would kind of find their seats again, so we can get rolling, that would be great. Hey, Kristen, can you go out and let everybody? Okay, we've got about another minute until we need to get started again. So if you're out in the lobby, please make your way back to your seats. Candidates, please make your way back up to the stage so we can keep this on time. We still have quite a few really awesome questions to ask. Thank you. Well, we've done several, in Noble, we've done several up there, and we've had pretty important questions too, so. Yeah, I think when we have the final one, we'll probably do some of the green trust. That white trust.
This was a good location.
We just have 3 or 4 more questions. We're going to cut off about. All right, folks, everybody can take their seats. We have several more things to get to before we let y'all loose. So everybody's back. Our next question on ethics was submitted by Kristen, a parent from Noble. Have you filed your campaign ethics reports by legal deadlines to provide voters transparency about who donated to your campaign? And if not, why and when do you plan to do so? Mr. Crozier.
Well, one of the things on filing reports are we have to have some kind of magic word now called transparency. So I was arguing with the Ethics Commission about, well, how do you want us to pay this? What if it's our own money? What if we just get out of our own pocket? What if we just have a few people contributing? We got a checking account. I said, well, banks I had before all failed. The FDIC killed all the ones in the 80s, and our most recent one, the Bank Union, it failed too. So I'll go over and have a confrontation with them and list the, whatever it was, $1,500, whatever it costs to file for office. Used to, if you got 15% of the vote, you got your money back. Now, being government, you know, they always like to keep whatever it is you give them. And let's see, ethics, of course, my ethics are Old Testament, New Testament. We threw out the 10 Commandments, and now people think it's all right to steal, right? Some places think it's all right to kill, commit adultery, commit false witness. So we got rid of all that. We need to put it back. So I said we don't need to move forward. We need to move backward. Backward to pick up the things that made us good and strong. Oklahoma's going to be blessed because of our anti-abortion bill. You know, when you kill 62 million babies from 1973 until now, and we finally get it stopped, we're already starting to have motion picture business, take it away from California. Manufacturing business, 2 biggest things we export in the United States is airplanes and motion pictures, so we're going to have lots of money and lots of jobs, and lots of people are going to move here. Probably need to figure out how to make the houses on computer, what do they call it, 3D, because we're going to need an extra 100 million homes in this country for everybody to live in, so they don't have to live on the streets like my cousins complain about in San Diego and LA. So ethics, you have to do what's right. Man doesn't know what's right unless he reads the Bible. He can read all the other 3 million books like Bill Banowski said we needed at OU. Yeah, but there's only one that counts. And if you don't get it right, you have to repent a lot, right?
Thank you. Secretary Walters.
Yes, always filed ethics reports on time, always will. Transparency is very important at all levels of government or running a campaign, so I will always be dedicated to being very transparent with everything.
Okay. Dr. Grace.
Mine are all filed, have been filed, will continue to file. I think it's important for everyone to be able to access that stuff. We have rules and regulations we're supposed to follow accordingly, and so we should be doing that if we're running for office.
Thank you. Dr. Cox?
Yeah, absolutely. Details are extremely important, and especially for the person that's going to be state superintendent, and following your ethics report is one of those details. And so, yes, mine will always be filed on time and be very transparent for everyone to see.
Mr. Crozier, your rebuttal?
Well, the reports, like I said, I've got to go in and visit with them because I've talked to them on the phone several times. Every time we do something on filing, we need to look and just see who it was. One time, of course, this has been quite a while ago now, I thought about going to work for American Express, and they said, well, you'd need to bring us 100 people that make whatever it was, 50 to 100,000 a year. So I just went and got the names of all 5,000 people on the Ethics Commission and said, well, I got 5,000 people making that money. Why don't you just talk to them? So the question is significant, it's important, but you got to have people read those ethic reports, see where the money comes from. For example, our state constitution, when you take an oath, you're not supposed to take free railroad rides places, and most of the time we don't have any railroads that give you rides anywhere except from Oklahoma City down to Texas. Now it's airplane rides, so I don't know if anybody's got free airplanes or not. I've been on a bunch of little ones, so I'd rather just stay on the big ones when I was in the Air Force. So it's important, needs to be done. You need to read the reports. I think they're online now if you want to see who contributes to whom.
Thank you. Next question. This question about support staff was submitted by Pat, a grandparent and school bus driver from Noble. Oklahoma schools are experiencing a severe shortage of school bus drivers. What plans would you like to see put into place to address this issue? Secretary Walters.
Yes, I look at the transportation budget. This has been a budget that has not been touched for, I think, over 20 years. I think that we're looking at, as CDLs are becoming more, marketable, as we're seeing Amazon, FedEx pay more and more. I think we've got to continue to not only support schools in getting transportation. I think we also need to look at, are there solutions to help get students transported to school through use of stipends for teachers to drive Suburbans? Could we do partnerships with churches that a lot of times have buses and vans available that don't get used during the week? We've seen a couple of states that have really leaned in on this. This is why I was working with some legislators on legislation this session to help free up some of the transportation money to be used in partnerships. Because I think that there could be potential there, especially for schools that have some unique transportation issues. And when you go around and talk to schools, it's like this with a lot of different areas, right? Schools in the inner city have one issue with transportation, suburban schools have another, and then rural schools can be kind of all over the place. I mean, you can talk to some rural schools where your superintendent's the bus driver, and there's 5 or 6 kids they got to drive miles and miles out to get. Well, could we utilize some of our transportation budget by giving administrators more flexibility so that some of that money could be used to give incentives to staff if they wanted to drive a Suburban and take a few kids every day, and then they get paid for that on top of their salary, utilizing support staff to do that as well. And again, the partnerships with other nonprofits and churches, we've seen some success in other states, so I would love for us to continue to not only make sure that schools have the resources available, but also have the flexibility with funds to use that in a way that meets their needs best.
Thank you. Dr. Grace.
Well, this is definitely something I think that there probably isn't a district in Oklahoma not struggling with the transportation piece and finding drivers. One of the things I think we have to keep doing is trying to work on the requirements for the CDL when it comes to just driving a school bus. Right now, part of what they have to do is be able to basically almost be a mechanic, some of the things they have to be able to do under the hood. In most cases, they're not going to be the one fixing the bus, so we need to figure out, are there pieces of that we can take out of the CDL portion for school bus drivers, because again, it's pretty rigorous, it's intensive, it's a lot of training. So is there a way to make it where they can be safe to drive the bus, because there's a lot of liability carrying folks' kids, but they don't necessarily need to be able to repair the bus, diagnose the engine, and many of the things they have to currently do under the hood. The other thing I would say is, absolutely, we've got to look at adjusting the funding piece that we get for transportation. That particular piece of the funding has not been adjusted in, 70s maybe. It's been a long time since that's been in place. We have the same rate that we've always had. And with gasoline prices and diesel prices right now, that's becoming even more of one of those issues when we talk about inflation and the impact on operational costs of schools. So we have to consider all of these things. I've batted around myself in my head at times trying to figure out, can we partner with a nearby district? In our situation, we have multiple K-8s around us. Can we partner together somehow and provide transportation? Are there ways for us to do that? So I think we have to be, very creative, and we have to sit down and have those conversations. But then we also have to understand there are complexities and uniqueness to school districts that may have 150 square miles that they're trying to transport kids. And so that's a whole different issue to come across. And so I think it's really important as state superintendent that you understand the complexities that schools have to deal with. And when we look at partnering with nonprofits or whoever, we've just got to make sure that we have the same rigorous background checks and training and driving requirements that we would for any school employee. And so I'm not open to those things, but I think we've got to think about them.
Thank you. Dr. Cox.
Yes, I understand the safety issues that the National Transportation System has put on our school bus drivers, but they've just gone a bit too far. And as was mentioned, you actually have to be a mechanic to pass the test. And we've had people go and take the test 3, 4, 5 times. I hear so many stories about that because if you just label one component under a bus wrong, they fail you. So when I received my bus driving certificate, and it was a few years ago, but I basically had to pass the CDL. Then I had to go to a site, and we got on a bus with the driver instruction, just like you do a vehicle, like a 16-year-old does. And we drove the bus around town, and we went through all the mechanics of driving a bus. And you had to make sure you did procedure right. So we really have to take another look at going back to that, because right now I need one bus driver, and actually I'd love to have 2 more as a backup. But nobody can find bus drivers. You see, and probably the same thing here, you see it all over the state. So it's really it's an interpretation of Oklahoma Transportation Group on what we have to do with our buses. And I'm extremely thankful to our technology centers who are out there trying to help us be flexible and provide training. But you still have to go through the process of learning everything about a bus that you don't even need to know. Now, the basic checks every day to make sure your tires are right, make sure everything is right around the bus to be safe picking kids up, I think that's valuable. But as far as the mechanics part, that's why we have a mechanic look at our bus. And so those are 2 separate issues, but common sense doesn't sometimes work with bus drivers, but with bus driving system and the testing, but we've got to get back to where it's simpler and that we can have qualified people who really can't climb under a bus and say that is what that is and pass the test. So we need help with that, and as a state superintendent, that's something that I will be looking in right off the bat is when I get in the door.
Thank you. Mr. Crozier.
Well, one of the things that happened under the Reagan administration was we're going to deregulate trucking companies so they can all compete with each other. So one of the things they forgot to do was to get rid of all the bureaucrats who wrote up all the tests for the CTLs and also for pilot tests. Right now, if you want to be a pilot in the United States, there's a big shortage of it. Those tests are easier and the physicals are not as hard as driving a bus in Oklahoma or any place else. The first time I flunked the bus test, I forgot to turn my lights on first. As we're always taught not to turn the lights on first. We're supposed to turn it on after we start it so it doesn't run the battery down. But I've been talking to these different people. I have a CDL, did accident investigation for the Department of Transportation for 5 years, read 25,000 accident reports, went on 5,000 accidents, 250,000 pictures. It's a joke what these bureaucrats have done with buses. It's one of the main thing on buses. Little girls who drop their books out in front of the bus get run over and get killed. I haven't seen that on any of the tests that they do. So there's a big problem with that. Now, like I said, you want bus drivers, you want them in the morning, you want them in the afternoon. That's when you take kids, right? You don't drive them all day and all night. So you need to find something else for them to do as well or trade that off. There's a new school, I think. I forgot what they're going to charge, $6,000, $10,000, $20,000 to pass the test, and they get all the code copies. You have to memorize them. Reminds me of our OTC at OU. We had to take the marching test every week to figure out which way you can make a left flank and a right flank. So I finally just memorized all the letters, go in, take the test 10 minutes, and hand it in to them. It is a significant problem. And it seems like government bureaucracies and people who do computers want them to do more and more and more. We always wanted to use the thing in the military, we call it KISS, keep it simple, stupid, teach them the deals, get a road test if you had to, and if you can't tell a carburetor from fuel injection system, it's just tough for the tester.
Thank you. Secretary Walters.
I do think this is an issue that's, I'm just so shocked, is caused by bureaucrats that decide that they know best for everybody. And in this situation, they knew best for schools, how to do transportation. And so we've got the feds that have all of these national standards that, frankly, a lot of them don't make sense anymore. And so, that's one of the things I think is very important for us as a state. We've got to look at what we're doing, and are we putting every single student, every single teacher, every single administrator with the capability to be successful, to be able to be innovative, to be able to be creative, to problem solve. And that's where you see so many issues like this. Hey, when red tape needs to be cut, we need to cut it. Free market allows the best ideas to go to the top, and there are times in education where you see the government get more involved in trying to tell a school how to run itself and putting all these different stipulations on rules like this, where a school goes, look, I could solve this problem, but you've given me all these regulations. This is, again, another example of government being the problem for schools that could have a solution for that.
Thank you. Our next question about ethics was submitted by Melissa, a teacher from Bixby. A recent report by Oklahoma Watch and the Frontier showed $8 million in federal pandemic relief funds were distributed directly to parents with blanket approval on expenditures from the Secretary of Education. The report detailed the Secretary said in a 2020 conference he hoped the effort would be a good example for future education policies that give education dollars directly to parents. This investigation detailed that over $500,000 of those dollars were spent on things unrelated to education, such as gaming systems, power washers, tools, and trees. What are your thoughts on this report? Dr. Grace.
Well, I think this just goes to kind of what we discussed earlier in our sort of caution, or some of the issues I had around the voucher bill as it was presented, where we have an opportunity for misuse of the funds and not enough guardrails and not enough things in place to ensure that the system works as it should. Arizona had something similar. They had millions and millions of dollars of fraud in sort of a system where things just got pushed out and there wasn't enough accountability and oversight. I think what Oklahoma taxpayers want is accountability and oversight of the public funds that are distributed, and whether those funds are distributed through the federal government for us to push out or not. But I think Oklahoma taxpayers want accountability and transparency on that. So we must ensure that when we push out things, that we have accountability and transparency, and that there's adequate reporting. And I think in this case, we just see there weren't enough guardrails in place. There wasn't enough eyes on it to ensure that everything was being spent on what it was supposed to be spent on. And I think it's unfortunate that we had $500,000 or whatever the number was in funds that didn't actually seem to be a resource for learning, which is what the funds were intended to do, was to bolster and help for resources for funding for families.
Thank you. Dr. Cox.
Well, I touched on this earlier and talked about the free gifts that were given out to our parents out there, and the emotion I had, I don't know if it was disgust or if it was just mad or irritated, but that was your taxpayer money that come down from the government as for CARES money. And it was just spent, we bought people across Oklahoma gifts with our money. And so as a school superintendent, down to the penny on all of this all these CARES Act money, the ESSER monies, we are down to the penny on where it goes. We have to do a plan, and then we have to spend it that way. We have to pay up front, and then we ask for reimbursement. And if we're off, if our coding is not right, they come back and they see. If we spend it on an item, we have to show invoices. So for a school district to have to be transparent like they should be with taxpayer money, and to see this $8 million and then $2 million was given back to the government that could have been used to be back in our schools. $2 million of the $8 million was given back to them. And so frustrated, mad, irritated, it's a prime example of experience. If I was over that CARES money, there would not have been any of this happening. That money went straight to educational processes like it was supposed to, not to a TV out there for somebody, or a fireplace, or a Game Boy. It would have went to help a child. And that is the prime example of why you can't run vouchers through Class Act. And I think what irritated me more is we went to Florida and picked class wallet and paid them $700,000 to run this program. $700,000. I can just see what I could do with that in my school with my kids. So I'm ashamed. I'm embarrassed. I just could not even believe it happened.
Thank you. Mr. Crozier.
Well, I think we need to be frugal with our money. Part of it probably changed when Nixon was president and took us off the gold standard, and we should just print as much money as we want, as well as the money that's printed overseas, which is a separate group to buy military hardware and items. But the U.S. government, when I took the contracting school at Tinker, how to buy stuff for the Air Force, the people that taught us in class were from American George Washington University. It was the last class we had. So I've been going to school all my life. The feds are supposed to be able to come in and monitor stuff. So the only little local story I can tell is when I was a bank teller at my uncle's bank in Norman, and I gave out about 10 grand a day. Today it would probably be 100,000 before we had the ATM machines. And my friends at school would say, "Doesn't it bother you to have all that money, with your hands on it? Does it bother you?" I said, "Well, no, I just make sandwiches with it." But it never bothered me, it didn't enter my mind. But when you have these huge amounts of money and people want them and there's a way to get it through government contracting and so forth, then I'll try to get it. And it's a little different than our M&Ms up here. You all know where they came from. Everybody know World War I. The soldiers were in the trenches. They had to have some chocolate to eat. Wouldn't melt in their pockets. Melt in their hands to their pockets. So they're one of the biggest government contractors now, all the subsidiary agencies they have. And this tends to be a big problem. We want to get rich, we want the money. Of course, I have to remind them when they die, they can't take it with them. Transparency needed to be done. You need to be able to go in and look and see where the money goes. If it didn't go, get it back. And there's just millions, I used to say millions, billions, maybe trillions of dollars now that the party in power gave out to all their friends. To me, they're getting my age or getting old. Of course, these people are all younger than I am. I will hold that against them like Reagan used to say. But they all would feather their nests. And even the president's son, I'm going to beat up on him. His connections with Ukraine. Are we just having a war to cover up Ukraine's money spending? Or are we going to let the Ukrainians win and beat the Russians?
Thank you. Secretary Walters.
So when I'm appointed to be a cabinet secretary in September 2020, one of the first things I did is to make sure all of our policies were put in place to support every Oklahoma student, and started looking over government contracts to ensure accountability and transparency of taxpayer dollars. That is incredibly important to me, to make sure that your hard-earned dollars get where they're supposed to. I found a government contract where a vendor did not uphold their end of the contract, and the governor and myself are holding that vendor accountable. That's what we will do. That's what I will always do. That is what I am doing with the textbook vendors that are putting critical race theory in your textbooks. I sent them a letter and I said, "Listen, you're not going to do business in the state of Oklahoma if you violate our laws." Just like I told this vendor that if you are not going to uphold your end of the contract, we will hold you accountable for breaching contract. Now, far left-wing Democrats have attacked me for that. I'm not surprised at all. I'm not surprised at all that people that don't want parents to have choice or parents to get assistance want to attack me for that. But I'm going to tell you, I will always hold accountable your hard-earned taxpayer dollars. I will always hold vendors in the state of Oklahoma accountable. I will always make sure our state laws and our state contracts are upheld. And guess what? When you do that to vendors, when you do that to companies, sometimes they don't like it. Well, frankly, I'm not too worried about that. I'm more worried about making sure that Oklahomans are getting the most out of their taxpayer dollars, and that every dollar for education is used for our kids and for our kids' education, and I will always do that.
Secretary Walters, this question is specifically pertinent to you. This was your project, your baby, your effort. In the report, Class Wallet did provide an email to reporters that showed you had given some sort of blanket approval in their request for, where do we stop people from, like, where can we limit expenses? Did you understand that that was the question? I'm kind of wondering where the confusion came in on how people were going to be permitted to spend that grant money.
No, they're pulling things out of context that have nothing to do with the way the program functioned. Again, I started as Secretary of Education in September 2020. A program was already in place, a contract was already signed, was already negotiated, and I step in and make sure that that contract is being upheld. And when we found that it wasn't being upheld, now there has been action taken against that vendor for not doing their job. And again, guess what? When you hold vendors accountable, when you hold contractors accountable, they start pointing fingers. And I'm really disappointed in the way that that's been described or the way that I've been attacked for that. But you know what? That's the reality. When you are a conservative and when you fight to make sure that taxpayer dollars are being held in high esteem with full transparency, guess what? They push back on that. And again, instead of accepting responsibility the way that the vendor should have, they've chosen to engage us with that and not do their end of the bargain. So that will continue to play out, but we will absolutely hold them accountable for not doing their job and not meeting their contractual obligations.
Thank you. Dr. Grace.
I would just go back to the point that I think when we start talking about oversight of these kinds of, whether it's gear funds or other grant monies or federal dollars that come into the state or the department's budget or any of the things that we want to talk about, this is where it becomes really, really important that we have a state superintendent that's had experience in working with these complex budgets and providing the kind of oversight and understands some of the nuances that also have to be in these contracts to make sure that we have guardrails in place, that we have all the things in place that matter the most so that we are taking care and being responsible for those taxpayer dollars however they come in. And so for me, I would just go back to saying it's important to reiterate that experience matters in overseeing these kinds of complexities that are part of the Department of Education. And as an experienced superintendent, I know how to do that.
Thank you. Next question. This question on school safety was submitted by an anonymous participant. Oh, excuse me, actually, we decided to move past this out of sensitivity.
Oh, I was ready for that question.
I appreciate that. I think we decided to move past it out of sensitivity. We'll submit that as a written
Sure.
question. Okay, sounds good. So we're wrapping up. This is the final question and your opportunity to close today's event. From each of you, we'd like to hear what makes you different from your peers on the ballot and why should voters select you on June 28th? Mr. Crozier.
The reason is why to vote for me. The other people here have taught some classes along. My man on here on the left has. But you need to put a classroom teacher who has had business and government experience in this job. Look at all the government contracts that we have to make sure they go by it, make sure they follow the rules as well as things on safety that you were talking about. If you want to see my deal on safety, it was when I ran last time when I got the nomination for Secretary of Education in Oklahoma, Superintendent. It was on the Daily Show, so if you want to look that up, you can look it up. 10 or 12 years ago, books that shields, you use those underneath the desks and put the Kevlar on them, and pistols will not penetrate those. The biggest thing is now is response time. You have a good government bureaucracy, even in the military, it takes response time to go out and get the enemy or these people that shoot up these schools. So you have to have a way to stop them before they get there. You may not save everybody, but you're going to save a bunch of them. So the pistol bullets will not penetrate the books. The AK-47s and other machine guns will. You have to have some kind of response. Back in the 50s, when we were having atomic bombs, the Russians used to hide under the desk. They wouldn't do any good. But if your teacher in front of the room or somebody comes in, the desk will hide most of what you're doing. So you can either throw the books at them and have them be aggressive and not run away, but attack them. Anybody that does the small kids and stuff, you know where they're from. They're demonic. They need to be left behind. You need to see what their tweets say. If they say they're going to kill somebody, the good people, remember, don't think that the bad people are as bad as they are. So you have to know how to do that. Textbooks need to be changed. You need to get rid of the state textbook committee. That's another place where they used to try to bribe us for their certain books. That needs to be given to the local school districts. They can pick out the books they want. Hopefully they can read.
Thank you. And again, what makes you different from your peers on the ballot and why should voters select you on June 28th? Secretary Walters.
So what I've seen is our education system is not producing the outcomes that we want. We're 49th in educational outcomes. I look around the state. I see parents that want to be more engaged. I see teachers that are committed to our kids. So what I see is we have got to do more to put parents in charge of their kids' education. We've got to get more parental involvement and make sure that everything is transparent for the parents. We've got to make sure that teachers are equipped to be successful inside our schools. And we have to have a state superintendent who's willing to fight back on the far left The Biden administration and all the nonsense that they push, the feds always have a new line of nonsense that they try to push on our state. Here's the reality. Oklahomans should determine what our education system looks like. Not the federal government, not Joe Biden. None of those folks need to have a say in what we're doing. Here's what it needs to be. We need to come up with a plan moving forward to empower families, making sure they have all the options available to them on their kids' education, make sure that the schools are transparent on what's going on, make sure that kids have multiple pathways to success, making sure teachers have the supports that they need to be successful in the classrooms, to make sure that critical race theory, any other kind of nonsense, the boys going to the girls' bathrooms, all that nonsense is out of our schools, all of the low expectations that the left brings to our schools too, because don't forget that. This low expectation mindset comes from the left. They don't want people to be held accountable for their actions and individual responsibility to be weakened. We are a conservative state. We need a conservative superintendent who says we can lead in education. We can absolutely empower our kids to be successful because, not for the ranking, but because of what that means for our kids. Because I want every Oklahoma student to have the best opportunity at success in the entire country. I want that to be for our kids. We can do it. We have the communities to do it. We have the folks in the classroom that want to do it. We have the parents that want to do it. But we have to have a conservative superintendent with the vision to be willing to move us forward on that path. And I want to be that person for you, for your kids, and for the future of Oklahoma.
Thank you. And Dr. Cox, what makes you different from your peers on the ballot, and why should voters select you? Right. The order looks like she's... Okay. Dr. Grace.
I think the question was what makes us different from our peers. And I think for me, what I can say is I spent 12 years in a classroom. I spent 7 years in building level leadership, 8 years as an assistant superintendent of human resources, and 6 years now as a superintendent. So I have a very well-rounded career in education. I'm a 33-year educator. Some people might say, oh, well, that means you might be part of the problem. No, I've always been a very innovative person in my classroom, a very innovative leader in buildings, and a very innovative leader at the district level. And so I think when I look at State Superintendent of Public Instruction, and I look at all that's at stake in our state, and making sure that we have better educational outcomes, and we look at everything, I think this is a position that needs somebody that has that intensive experience and the comprehensive experience in a K-12 system. I am the only individual on the ballot on either side that has that comprehensive experience in a K-12 system. So for me, that's what makes me different. That's what sets me apart from my peers, is that I've had all of those various experiences. I've spent time in multiple positions. I've been in 4 different school districts, and again, I've done it in comprehensive school districts of different sizes. The Department of Education is a large department. It's going to take somebody with vision and somebody that understands how to restructure things, how to redefine things, and I think that I am suited for this role because of that experience.
Thank you. Dr. Cox.
So it was mentioned experience matters. Experience has to matter. You know, when I was driving up here yesterday, I stopped by and held my little 2-week-old granddaughter in my arms. And I'm telling you, it just flashed in front of me the importance of what I'm going to be doing. Because I could see her future ahead, and I can see the future of our kids if I am not placed in the state superintendent's position. I've been doing a superintendent principal for 28 years. And not just 28 long years or just longevity, but I've been through several economic downturns. I've been through those, and I've been able to bring my school through that. And so as far as experience within that, I've been in the high schools my first 8 years teaching. I've been at K-12 schools. But for 28 years, I've been the human resources person. I've been special ed director. I've been child nutrition. I've been transportation. I've been federal programs director. I know every single part of what's done in public schools. So when I step in there day one, I can take care of the things that need to be done. So this position is important. $3.2 billion of your money comes through there every year. Are we going to allow somebody who has no training, absolutely no training, to be in that position? Or are you going to put somebody in there who has been trained, who is trusted to teach public school finance, which I'm currently doing, has taught all the courses that superintendents have to take, the 5 courses. I've taught all those at a graduate level. I'm trusted across the state. I'm chairman of a board that has 500 school districts in it that takes care of workman's comp insurance. I'm the treasurer of a group that insures over $20 billion worth of school property. across the state. So I have those leadership capabilities. I am trusted. And so I'm just asking you to vote for me on June the 28th. Look me up on Facebook at Elect Dr. John Cox. Find my phone number and call me, because we have to make this happen. Experience does matter.
Thank you to each of you. This concludes our Republican primary election forum for Oklahoma State Superintendent of Public Instruction. Thank you to our candidates for taking the time to address voters today, taking some questions. Thank you to the Oklahoma Rural Schools Coalition for organizing our event today, Sulphur Public Schools for providing the venue, and my colleagues at News 9 for providing the technical broadcast. To all the voters here today and viewing online, we want to remind you to show up to vote on June 28th for the primary election. Many voting precinct locations have changed, so make sure you know where to go vote. You can check your polling place at okvoterportal.okelections.us. We'll post that with this broadcast online, so you can find that link there as well. Thank you for coming, and have a wonderful rest of your weekend.
Thank you.
Thank all of you for being here.
Thank you. Hey, we would have good conversations. Well, I guess we'll see each other.